Chapter 2. The Case of Domestic Animals. The main principle of animals' rights, if admitted to be fundamentally sound, will not be essentially affected by the wildness or the domesticity, as the case may be, of the animals in question. Both classes have their rights, though these rights may differ largely in extent and importance. It is convenient, however, to consider the subject of the domestic animals apart from that of the wild ones, inasmuch as their whole relation to mankind is so much altered and emphasised by the fact of their subjection. Here, at any rate, it is impossible, even of the most callous reasoners, to deny the responsibility of man in his dealings with the vast races of beings, the very conditions of whose existence have been modified by human civilization. An incalculable mass of drudgery at the cost of incalculable suffering is daily, hourly performed for the benefit of man by these honest, patient labourers in every town and country around the world. Are these countless services to be permanently ignored in a community which makes any pretension to a human civilization? Will the free citizens of the enlightened republics of the future be content to reap the immense advantages of animals' labour without recognising that they owe them some consideration in return? The question is one that carries with its own answer. Even now it is nowhere openly contended that domestic animals have no rights. But the human mind is subtle to evade the full significance of his duties, and nowhere is this more conspicuously seen than in our treatment of the lower races. Given a position in which man profits largely, or thinks he profits largely, for it is not always a matter of certainty, by the toil or suffering of the animals, and our respectable moralists are pretty sure to be explaining to us that this providential arrangement is better for the animals themselves. The wish is farther to the thought in these questions, and there is an accommodating elasticity in our social ethics that permits of the justification of almost any system which it would be inconvenient to us to discontinue. Thus we find it stated, and on the authority of a bishop, that man may lay down the terms of the social contract between animals and himself, because forsooth the general life of a domestic animal is one of very great comfort, according to the animal's own standard, probably one of almost perfect happiness. Now this is prating about the animal's own standards is nothing better than hypocritical cant. If man is obliged to lay down the terms of the contract, let him at least do so without having recourse to such a suspiciously opportune afterthought. We have taken the animals from a free natural state into an artificial thraldom in order that we, and not they, may be the gainers. Thereby it cannot possibly be maintained that they owe us gratitude on this account, or that it is alleged, or this alleged debt may be used as a means of evading the just recognition of their rights. It is more necessary to raise a strong protest against this Jesuitical mode of reasoning, because, as we shall see, it is so frequently employed in one form or another by the apologists of human tyranny. On the other hand, I desire to keep clear also of the extreme contrary contention that man is not morally justified in imposing any sort of subjection on lower animals. An abstract question of this sort, however interesting as speculation, and impossible in itself to disprove, is beyond the scope of the present inquiry, which is primarily concerned with the state of things at present existing. We must face the fact that the services of domestic animals have become, whether rightly or wrongly, an integral part of the system of modern society. We cannot immediately dispense with those services any more than we can dispense with human labour itself, but we can provide at least a present step towards a more ideal relationship in the future, that the conditions under which all labour is performed, whether by men or by animals, shall be such as to enable the worker to take some appreciable pleasure in the work instead of experiencing a lifelong course of injustice in ill treatment. And here it may be convenient to say a word as to the existing line of demarcation between the animals legally recognised as domestic and those ferae naturae of wild nature. In the Act of 1849, in which a penalty is imposed for cruelty to any animal, it is expressively provided that the word animal shall be taken to mean any horse, mare, gelding, bull, ox, cow, heifer, steer, calf, mule, ass, sheep, lamb, hog, pig, sow, goat, dog, cat, or any other domestic animal. It will be shown in a later chapter that the interpretation of this vague reference to any other domestic animal is likely to become a point of considerable importance, since it closely affects the welfare of certain animals which, though at present regarded as wild and therefore outside the pale of protection, are to all intents and purposes in a state of domestication. For the present, however, we may group the domestic animals of this country in 3 main divisions. 1. Horses, asses and mules. 2. Oxen, sheep, goats and pigs. 3. Dogs and cats. Food, rest and tender usage are declared by Humphrey Primmett, the old author already quoted, to be the 3 rights of the domestic animals. Lawrence's opinion is to much the same effect. Man is indispensably bound, he thinks, to bestow upon animals in return for the benefit he derives from their services, good and sufficient nourishment, comfortable shelter and merciful treatment, to commit no wanton outrage upon their feelings whilst alive, and to put them to the speediest and least painful death when it is necessary to deprive them of life. But it is important to note that something more is due to animals, and especially to domestic animals, than the mere supply of a provender and mere immunity from ill usage. We owe justice to men, wrote Montaigne, and grace and benignity to other creatures that are capable of it. There is a natural commerce and mutual obligation betwixt them and us. Sir Arthur Helps admirably expressed this sentiment in his well-known reference to the duty of using courtesy to animals. If these be the rights of domestic animals, it is pitiful to reflect how commonly and how grossly they are violated. The average life of our beasts of burden, the horse, the ass and the mule, is from beginning to end a rude negation of their individuality and intelligence. They are habitually addressed and treated as stupid instruments of man's will and pleasure, instead of the highly organised and sensitive beings that they are. Well might Thoreau, the humanist and most observant of naturalists, complain of man's not educating the horse, not trying to develop his nature, but merely getting work out of him, for such, it must be acknowledged, is the prevalent method of treatment, in 99 cases out of 100 at the present day, even where there is no actual cruelty or ill usage. We are often told that there is no other Western country where tame animals are so well treated as in England, and it is not only necessary to read the records of a century back to see that the inhumanities of the past were far more atrocious than any that are still practised in the present. Let us be thankful for these facts, showing that the current of English opinion is at least moving in the right direction, but it must yet be said that the sights that everywhere meet the eye of a humane and thoughtful observer, whether in town or country, are a disgrace to our vaunted civilization, and suggest the thought that, as far as the touch of compassion is concerned, the majority of our fellow citizens must be obtuse, not to say pachydermatous. Watch the cab traffic in one of the crowded thoroughfares of one of our great cities. Always the same luxurious patient procession of underfed, overloaded animals, the same brutal insolence of the drivers, the same accursed sound of the whip, and remembering that these horses are gifted with a large degree of sensibility and intelligence, must one not feel that the fate to which they are thus mercilessly subjected is a shameful violation of the principle which moralists have laid down? Yet it is to this fate that even the well-kept horses of the rich must in time descend, so to pass the declining years of a life devoted to a man's service. A good man, said Plutarch, will take care of his horses and dogs, not only while they are young, but when old and past service. We ought certainly not to treat living beings like shoes and household goods, which when worn out with use we throw away. Such was the feeling of the old pagan writer, and our good Christians of the present age scarcely seem to have improved upon it. True, they do not throw away their superannuated carriage horses. It is much more lucrative to sell them to the shopman or cab proprietor, who will in due course pass them on to the knacker and cat's meat man. The use of machinery is often condemned on aesthetic grounds because of the ugliness it has introduced into so many features of modern life. On the other hand, it should not be forgotten that it has immensely relieved the huge mass of animal labour, and that when electricity is generally used for purposes of traction, one of the foulest blots on our social humanity is likely to disappear. Scientific and mechanical inventions, so far from being necessarily antagonistic to the true beauty of life, may be found to be of the utmost service to it when they are employed for humane and not merely commercial purposes. Herein Thoreau is a wiser teacher than Ruskin. If all were as it seems, he says, and men made the elements their servants for noble ends, if the cloud that hangs over the engine were the perspiration of heroic deeds, and as the beneficent as that which floats over the farmer's fields, the elements and nature herself would cheerfully accompany men on their errands and to be their escort. It is no part of my purpose to enumerate the various acts of injustice of which domestic animals are the victims. It is sufficient to point out that the true cause of such injustice is to be sought in the unwarrantable neglect of their many intelligent qualities, and in the contemptuous indifference in which, in defiance of sense and reason, still classes them as brute beasts. What has been said of horses in this respect applies still more strongly to the second class of domestic animals. Sheep, goats, and oxen are regarded as mere livestock, while pigs, poultry, rabbits, and other marketable farm produce meet with even less consideration and are constantly treated with very brutal inhumanity by their human possessors. Let anyone who doubts this pay a visit to a cattle market and study the scenes that are enacted there. The question of the castration of animals may here be briefly referred to. That nothing but imperative necessity could justify such a practice must, I think, be admitted, for an unnatural mutilation of this kind is not only painful in itself, but deprive those who undergo it of the most vigorous and spirited elements of their character. It is said, with what precise amount of truth I cannot pretend to determine, that man would not otherwise be able to maintain his dominion over the domestic animals, but on the other hand, it may be pointed out that this dominion in no case destined to be perpetuated in its present sharply accentuated form, and that various practices, which in a sense are necessary now, i.e. the false position and relationship in which we stand towards the animals, will doubtlessly be gradually discontinued under the humaner system of a future. Moreover, castration as performed on cattle, sheep, pigs and fowls will no better object them to increase their size and improve their flavour for the table, is even at the present time utterly needless and unjustifiable. The bull, as Shelley says, must be degraded into the ox, and the ram into the wether, by an unnatural and inhuman operation, that the flaccid fibre may offer a fainter resistance to rebellious nature. In all its aspects, this is a disagreeable subject, and one about which the majority of people do not care to think, probably from an unconscious perception that the established custom could scarcely survive the critical ordeal of thought. There remains one other class of domestic animals, viz., those who have become still more closely associated with mankind through being the inmates of their homes. The dog is probably better treated on the whole than any other animal, though to prove how far we still are from a rational and consistent appreciation of his worth, it is only necessary to point to the fact that he is commonly regarded by a large number of educated people as a fit and proper subject for that experimental torture which is known as vivisection. The cat has always been treated with far less consideration than the dog, and despite the numerous scattered instances that might be cited to the contrary, it is feared that De Quincey was in the main correct when he remarked that the groans and screams of this poor persecuted race, if gathered into some great echoing hall of horrors, would melt the heart of the stoniest of our race. The institution of homes for lost and starving dogs and cats is a welcome sign of the humane feeling that is asserting itself in some quarters, but is also no less a proof of the general indifferentism which can allow the most familiar domestic animals to become homeless. It may be doubted, indeed, whether the condition of the household pet is in the long run more enviable than the beast of burden. Pets, like king's favourites, are usually the recipients of abundance of sentimental affection, but of little real kindness. So much easier it is to give temporary caresses than substantial justice. It seems to be forgotten, in a vast majority of cases, that a domestic animal does not exist for the mere idle amusement, any more than for mere commercial profit, of its human owner, and that for a living being to be turned into a useless puppet is only one degree better than to be doomed to the servitude of a drudge. The injustice done to the pampered lapdog is as conspicuous in its way as that done to the overworked horse, and both spring from one and the same origin. The fixed belief that the life of a brute has no moral purpose, no distinctive personality worthy of due consideration and development. In a society where the lower animals were regarded as intelligent beings and not as animated machines, it would be impossible for this incongruous absurdity to continue. This, then, appears to be our position as regards the rights of domestic animals. waving on the one hand and somewhat abstruse question whether man is morally justified in utilising animal labour at all, and on the other, the flirtatious assertion that he is constituting himself a benefactor by so doing. We recognise that the services of domestic animals have, by immemorial usage, become an important, and it may be said necessary element in the economy of modern life. It is impossible, unless every principle of justice is to be cast to the winds, that the due requital of these services should remain a matter of personal caprice. For slavery at all times is hateful and iniquitous, whether it is imposed on mankind or on the lower races. Apart from the universal rights they possess in common with all intelligent beings, domestic animals have a special claim on man's courtesy and sense of fairness, inasmuch as they are not his fellow creatures only, but his fellow workers, his dependents, and in many cases the familiar associates and trusted inmates of his home.